Hey, what's going on, everybody? It's Chris with Inside the U. So ever since Jim Larrañaga decided to step down, effective immediately on December 26th, the biggest question with the Miami basketball program has been who will be the next head coach of the Hurricanes. Currently, Bill Courtney has that title in an interim basis, and we will see how the rest of the season transpires in regards to his future. And there are a lot of names to consider. I posted an article on InsideTheU.com listing a combination of coaches I thought you should keep an eye on in college basketball, some rising coaches that could have a good season that have already put together a nice resume. And then also taking a look at the 4 former assistant coaches under Larrañaga while at Miami that went on to become head coaches. And to me, the name that tops the list is Chris Caputo, a former assistant coach at Miami for 11 seasons. He's currently the head coach at George Washington. He's in his 3rd year there. And I'm going to break down some thoughts on Chris, kind of go through his background. Also, my thoughts on watching his team play in the last 2 games, a win and a loss. So there's a lot to break down with my thoughts on George Washington basketball and how it looks under Coach Caputo. But definitely drop in the comments below. Let me know what you think and also what you're looking forward to seeing in the next head coach. What I will say in regards to the next head coach at Miami, and I did a breakdown also on InsideTheU.com already, taking a look at the other ACC coaches, the head coaches at the other programs right now, and looking at their resumes before they were hired at their respective schools. And what I can say is it is definitely pretty much a prerequisite to have head coaching experience heading into the ACC. There's only 3 coaches right now that did not have head coaching experience. However, they had unique situations at Duke, North Carolina, and Syracuse, as all 3 of the head coaches were played at that school and were longtime assistants at that school. So other than that, you pretty much have to have head coaching experience. So that is something to keep in mind with all of this. And that is, maybe the biggest difference, I think, with head coaching jobs and looking ahead to who's going to fill these roles between basketball and football. With football, you do get those assistant coaches getting promoted if they had that good pedigree as a coordinator. And in basketball, college basketball, it is more difficult to do that, jumping from assistant coach to a head coach in a major conference like the ACC. So just keep that in mind. In regards to Chris Caputo, I mentioned him not just because I think he's a strong candidate based on his ties to Miami and for other reasons, but based on some things that I'm hearing around the program. I'm hearing that he definitely has a strong following, a strong backing. People believe that he should be the next head coach at Miami. And I understand why there might be some reservations with that from the fan base, because they look at it like he's a guy from within, and a lot of people might want to just move on because of how things have gone with the baseball program, with their last 2 head coaching hires, and also the football program going with Manny Diaz, promoting him essentially from defensive coordinator to head coach and just not working out. So from the basketball standpoint, I understand it. However, I think you should definitely keep in mind that this basketball program, it's not a failing regime. They've had 2 bad seasons. It's not looked good the last 2 years. There's no doubt about that. But I think as a whole, in the totality of the Jim Larrañaga era, which includes Chris Caputo, it was not a failure. And Caputo was a big part of that success, going to 5 NCAA tournaments during his run there for 11 years while he was there. Helped Miami win an ACC title, both a regular season and a tournament title, in addition to pumping out NBA draft picks during that time and recruiting at a high level. And I will say, just from my experience of talking with Caputo in the past while he was at Miami, I definitely know that he holds the Miami job in high esteem and in high regards. And I think the Miami basketball program is a unique program. Yes, it's in a great conference, but it doesn't have the historical backing that some of the other teams in the conference or even other teams around the country have. However, you can win at Miami, and Coach Caputo knows what it takes. This is a guy he was known for being a great recruiter in the Northeast, has really strong ties to the Northeast. And I think that's very important to have at Miami. I think having that connection to the Northeast is really important in addition to the South, but I think he knows what it takes to be successful at Miami. I think simply put, he's going to do it differently than Larrañaga. He's a different type of coach. So in addition to having strong recruiting ties, understanding what it takes to recruit at Miami, and having those important connections to AAU programs, I think Coach Caputo is a sharp basketball mind. That always stood out to me during his time at Miami. And the way Coach Larrañaga would do it and does it is he would have a coach really focus on the defensive end of the court and another coach that worked on the offensive end of the floor and then another coach that focused on scouting. And when Caputo was at Miami, he really focused on the defensive end of the floor, the defensive coordinator, as Larrañaga would put it. And I'll get more into that. But real quick, just a little bit of a rundown of Coach Caputo while at George Mason. As I mentioned, he's in his third season, and he's got the Revolutionaries out to a 12-3 start, 1-1 in the conference. Both of the games that I watched were in the Atlantic 10, so I'll get into that in a little bit. But his first season, just to mention, his first season at George Washington, they go 16-16 overall. That was the most wins by the program since 2016 and 17 season. So that was certainly a step forward. They went 10-8 in the conference. That was the first time that they had a record above 500 in the conference after 5 straight losing seasons. So year one, off to a good start. Year two, last year, really struggled. Team dealt with a lot of injuries, off to a good start, but then dealt with a lot of injuries that they just couldn't overcome. They go 15-17 overall, 4-14 in the conference. And as I mentioned, this year, off to a really good start, 12-3, some really good metrics that stand out to me. And Coach Caputo knows he has a really young team. This isn't a team that is supposed to compete for an Atlantic 10 conference championship this season. When you're at a program like that, it is a building process. But it seems like he's off to a good start. As I mentioned, the 12-3 mark. But I want to touch on what I saw last game in particular with Dayton. The win over Dayton was highly impressive. 82-62 victory over Dayton, a team that had played 5 top 10 teams already this season with 2 top 10 wins. And they're coached by Anthony Grant, a former Miami High product. He grew up in Miami. That's where he played. He hasn't coached at Miami, but he's been a head coach. And I think a lot of people would like to see him at Miami. And in this video, I'm not going to touch too much on Anthony Grant's team, although keep in mind on Dayton and how they do throughout the season, because they can certainly be an NCAA tournament team and one to watch. His name could pop up again as a coach that could get into a better conference than the Atlantic 10. However, the reason why I'm not going to mention him too much at this point is because he is coaching at his alma mater. And I think right now, it would seem like it would take a lot for him to leave that program. He's been at other places, but maybe Miami, if they were certainly interested, maybe he would decide to move on. But for now, I'm not going to focus on him, but certainly could do it later on. Okay, so the win over Dayton was highly impressive. And going into it, it wasn't something that I expected. After watching them lose to Richmond 66-61 in their last game, a game they were up by 13 points in the second half and just let it slip away. Just a disappointing ending to that game. You know, going into the game against Dayton, they were 9-point underdogs. I wasn't expecting them to win, and certainly not by that margin, especially when they were missing their best player, Darren Buchanan Jr., which I will feature in a little bit later. But they were without their best player, coming off a loss, playing essentially either the best team in the conference or certainly a team trying to contend for that conference title. And so, again, I wasn't expecting them to do much, but they really impressed me. I was highly impressed with how they played. They got up big early. They made some threes, made a lot of threes, but they played great defense, and that's what stood out to me in this game as they went on a 13-0 run to really, at the end of the game, to really blow it open. And they got up big, and then Dayton really did a good job of cutting back into that lead. And then George Washington just kind of kept staying with it. Didn't get rattled too much, made some key shots, got some key stops, and rattled off the win. It was certainly highly impressive to do it without their best player. And they've really shown, I think they really made a statement to the rest of the Atlantic 10 in that game. Because, you know, look at George Washington coming off last year. They were picked to finish second to last in the conference this year, whereas Dayton was picked to finish second. That kind of shows you the gap of these two teams and these two programs with where they're at. But like I said, Coach Caputo had his guys ready to play, and they were very entertaining in doing so. A really exciting brand of basketball, and it starts with defensive efforts. And look, they held Dayton to a season low 35% from the field, And that's been something that George Washington has been able to do well this season, holding teams to 40% shooting. Right now, they're fifth in the conference in points allowed while ranking second in scoring. So that's definitely a good mix right there. Defensive efficiency is much better than it was a year ago. And the things that Coach Caputo is really making a point of emphasis as his team leads the conference in steals per game, but he's really focusing a lot on energy and effort. And then also being disruptive on defense, getting those steals, but also just making things difficult. And that's what I saw against Dayton. Again, this is a good team in Dayton, and he had his team playing really good defense, particularly on the perimeter. I thought they did a good job there, making things difficult for Dayton. And then, just like I said, applying that pressure, being disruptive, and really creating a lot of things on the defensive end, which I think led to their offensive success. Again, the game got away from them, from Dayton late in the game as they finished on that big run. But it was how they were really pressuring them throughout the game that really made it difficult, and that really stood out to me. So again, George Washington was doing a great job of creating turnovers and also scoring off of turnovers. They had 18 points off turnovers, which I thought was a big part of the game too. And that just goes to the coaching philosophy of Coach Caputo of really wanting to take advantage of creating turnovers, scoring off of that, and then that kind of creates an exciting brand of basketball. So if Chris Caputo was to be Miami's next head coach, I think one of the things that is fun to think about with any of these coaches is, are there players on the current team that could help Miami and transfer over? With the transfer portal, everyone understands that. And I think even at a program like George Washington, a lower level program than the ACC, I think everything is on the table for transfers, as you've seen around the country. And you saw it firsthand from a Miami standpoint with what Drake did. They had guys going from Division II, following their head coach to Division I, and having the success that they had against Miami, but also in the tournament there at the beginning of the season and then throughout the year. So I definitely think there's guys to watch. And to me, there's 3 players to keep in mind from George Washington in the transfer portal for next year. Certainly it's all speculatory. These guys are enjoying their time there based on some of the comments I've read and seeing how they have progressed in their careers and how they're doing right now at George Washington. But it starts with their best player, and that's Darren Buchanan Jr., who started at Virginia Tech, a guy from the DMV, highly successful there, player of the year, and then goes to Virginia Tech, doesn't play, redshirts, goes to George Washington, and is off to a really good start. And he's the guy that missed last game against Dayton, but I did get to watch him against Richmond. He's a really impressive player, kind of this all-around guy, 15 points a game, has good size. It seems like he could play that stretch 4 if you need him to, play the 3. He can kind of do different things, which I like in his skill set. Rebounds the ball, can shoot it, and I just think he's a good player. I think he would certainly be an asset to Miami, next season. Again, if everything plays out. But I just like what Buchanan's bringing to the table. I like his mindset, just kind of watching a little bit of his interviews. But again, I like his game on both ends of the floor. And Buchanan's one of the young players for George Washington, just a redshirt sophomore. And the second guy that really stood out to me, a guy to keep in mind moving forward in his career, is redshirt freshman point guard Christian Jones. He had a great game in the game that I watched, so I'm going to come across, singing his praises because he had 23 points, a season high, played really well, shot the ball well, got off to a really great start early in the game, made some key shots, and his size really stands out. He redshirted last year, but Coach Caputo really likes his future, and he's the guy that, that was just his second start against Dayton. They plug him in there, and he did great. And I think he's certainly going to be a player to watch in the Atlantic 10 moving forward with his skill set. He's a guy that comes from a high-level program there and playing in the EYBL there in AAU ball. So he's a guy that knows what it takes, and he's just someone that I was highly impressed with. He shoots it well from 3, and then I like what he can do defensively, but he handles the ball well as a lefty, which you always like to see sometimes there, handling the ball from that point guard spot. And then the last guy, Rafael Castro, another guy who'd have only 1 year of eligibility left after this season. And if you remember, I know this goes back years, but Rafael Castro was a former Miami recruit when Caputo was there at Miami. And Castro was a guy that rebounded the ball at a really high level at that time, and he's doing that again right now for George Washington. Started at Providence, picked Providence over Miami in the recruiting process. but he's a guy that was really good defensively in this game against Dayton, blocking shots. He's a top shot blocker, and that's something that Miami hasn't had of late. They've had some size in there, but not guys that affect shots. And with Castro, he's averaging about 1.5 blocks a game, but against Dayton, he did a great job of affecting shots. And I think he's been like a key to their defense, why they've been so successful. So I think Castro can be a key piece for a team like Miami defensively. But I think these three guys are just three guys to really pay attention to from the transfer portal standpoint, because I like their abilities. I think they're going to go on to have good years. And because of the conference they're in, it's only natural to think about the transfer portal and their possibilities. Again, all three of these guys, it's pure speculatory, but it's the three guys that stood out to me. But George Washington does have other young players that have shown flashes as well. Just want to mention that in case this does happen. I think that everything's going to be on the table with this program. So in addition to the roster possibilities for Caputo, the other thing to keep in mind is how will he build out his staff? If he were to return to Miami and be the head coach, who would be his 3 assistant coaches? And I do think there's some names to pay attention to. I think one of his current assistant coaches, Lamont Franklin, could become in play for a Miami assistant coaching job. He was a Miami director of operations for 4 years, and now he's moved into a role of being an assistant coach, another coach that has really strong DMV ties, recruiting ties, so he could be a possibility. Another guy I think also to keep in mind are the guys on Miami's staff. I think Bill Courtney, who's been at Miami since 2019, he coached with Caputo for 3 seasons. Maybe he stays on as an assistant coach under Caputo. And then another guy would be DJ Irving, who coached 1 season, just the 1 season with Caputo at Miami. And then Cody Kimball, I think he's a great young coach to keep in mind, but because he didn't coach with Caputo, he could be a guy that doesn't come back because, again, you only get 3. But I still think he's someone to keep in mind because, again, when Caputo left, that's when Kimball came in, and Caputo could be just looking for ties to the program that he has already. But, again, Kimball with his recruiting ties to the Carolinas, I think he would be a good one to keep on board as well. So that is going to wrap everything up for me in this video, but I appreciate you watching. And if there's other coaches you would like for me to focus on, either in a future video or just watch their teams play, and I can offer my thoughts as what I kind of see with this coach and if it would be a fit at Miami. I think that's a big thing. And for me, just my final thoughts on Coach Caputo, if he were to end up being Miami's next head coach, I do think it would be a positive thing. I like what he brings to the table from an offensive and defensive standpoint, his head coaching experience, his complete understanding of what it takes to win at Miami, his ties to the ACC. I think all those things are big. And I like what I've seen with what he's done already at George Washington. Although right now, again, it's a really young team. So we will see how the rest of the season goes. But drop in the comments below. Let me know what you think. Who are some guys that you're curious about? And once again, I appreciate you taking the time to watch this video and support the program and support InsideTheU and myself. So thanks again for watching. Have a good rest of the day and take care.